The latest. Thank you for your love and support. I appreciate you all. Some people are crying. No, severance of the latest Dodging one. The marks are falling in the European Parliament. Today, these people are not crying about human rights anymore. They are crying about their lost keys to the Sahel. The European Parliament has issued an urgency resolution with immediate effect for the release of Niger's ousted President Mohamed Bazoum. Now he must be released, but we must ask, is it about Bazoum's freedom or is it about the Western border management and the uranium that fuels Europe? Which one are they fighting for? Because Mohamed Bazoum, as we know, serves the interests of these people. Let's look at how it all happened. On July 26, 2023, the presidential guard led by our all-in-all, the savior, the protector, the unifier, General Abdurrahman Tiani moved against Bazoum. But why? Because Bazoum was the West golden boy. You understand? Why his people lived in one of the poorest countries on earth. Bazoum was the uncle for French and U.S. military bases. The military didn't just take a man. They took back a country that had become a strategic parking lot for Western interests. In the debate, European leaders called Bazoum, quote, democratically elected, and of quote, hero. He's a hero. One speaker explicitly admitted the truth. Quote, we can't stand by in silence while a European key ally is imprisoned. End of quote. Is imprisoned. Notice the language, the latest Dodging one. They didn't just say a leader for the Nigerian people. They said, quote, European key ally.
We now move to the discussion of the arbitrary detention of President Mohamed Bazoum by the junta in Niger. And I give the floor, first of all, to the authors of the resolution. To begin will be Christophe Commun.
Monsieur le Président, Monsieur le Commissaire.
President, Commissioner, dear colleagues, tomorrow we'll be voting on an urgency resolution which I set great heart by. We call for the release of the President of Niger, Mohamed Bazoum. It's the fourth time. Now, since 26th of July 2023, when the coup took place, the military have basically cut him off from the outside world. He doesn't have access to a phone, and there's been 950 days of unjustified detention. Now, he's democratically elected, and he contributed there to jihadist terrorism, arms trafficking, human trafficking, and contributed to regional stability. We can't stand by in silence when a European key ally is imprisoned. We need to show solidarity, and his release is urgent for two main reasons. First of all, on the 2nd of April 2026, his mandate will come to an end. If he's not released before then that has to be seen as a major failure, and a clear message needs to be sent to our partners and their opponents. We are allies, we take our commitment seriously, and we want more freedom and more stability. The detention of a democratically elected person is unacceptable. He's imprisoned by a military junta which is still in power today. We call on the immediate release of President Bazoum and his wife, the restoration of the constitutional order, and the organization of democratic elections. There is insecurity and a spiral of violence, and the territory now is open to jihadist attacks on religious minorities. We can't stand by and see this happen, and we have an urgency resolution on this. We need to vote in favour of it.
Muriel Laurent.
Thank you very much. Muriel Laurent.
Merci, Monsieur le...
Thank you, President. Commissioner, dear colleagues. The coup and arrest of President Bazoum showed a turning point in Niger's history. This is one of the poorest countries in the world, and it is now facing growing uncertainty and insecurity. Millions have been displaced and depend on humanitarian aid for their survival. In this context, the decision to discourage NGOs and throw out international organizations has dramatic consequences. Let us be clear. The junta cannot replace these humanitarian organizations. They need to be able to take up the humanitarian mission. Without an immediate return to the rule of law, there will be no peace and no development. Civil society must be able to act freely to prepare a swift and credible democratic transition. Finally, all political prisoners must be released, including Mohamed Bazoum, because without fundamental freedoms and stable rule of law, there can be no stability for the people of Niger. Time is pressing on and the world cannot remain silent.
Nathalie Loiseau.
Thank you very much, Nathalie Loiseau. Thank you, President. From almost 3 years ago, the military coup d'etat took place in Niger, since which time President Bazoum has been held in detention. And over these 3 years, we've seen catastrophic outcomes. The country is no longer a democracy, the people are suffering, and the jihadist military junta is making, the jihadist military is making progress. One significant absent party is France, which is not present, but which is being constantly accused of being responsible for the country's troubles. Apparently it's kidnapping children and arming the jihadists, nothing less. The junta is calling on the people of Niger to prepare for a war against France. These are pathetic lies. The Niamey military who carried out the coup are responsible for their situation. They rejected France. They've called in Russia. They are responsible for their failures, which are numerous. Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. Catalina Vieira, you have the floor.
Dear Chair, colleagues, Commissioner, more than 2 years after the coup, Niger's democratically elected President Mohamed Bazoum remains under house arrest without charge, without trial. This is unacceptable. I call for his immediate and unconditional release, not only for him, but for all those arbitrarily detained, like, for example, human rights defender Moussa Chagari, who is detained solely for reporting critically on the authorities, because the junta has targeted political opponents, civil society, and the media. This crackdown on dissent reflects a broader pattern across the Sahel: democratic backsliding, shrinking civic space, and a sharp decline in press freedom. We should worry about this trend and do our best to reverse it. At the same time, Niger faces a severe humanitarian crisis. Insecurity, economy, and climate change have left around 3 million people in need for assistance. There, the EU must continue its efforts to ensure humanitarian aid reaches those who need it the most. Today, this Parliament calls for the restoration of constitutional order and the full respect of fundamental rights for everyone in Niger. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Thomas Fröhlich, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Niger is a fragile state. Poverty, instability, corruption, Islamist terrorism, these problems have persisted for many years. The military coup has further destabilized the country. President Mohamed Bazoum has now been arbitrarily detained for over 2 years. Many states of the region have condemned this. One might think that this has nothing to do with us. After all, Niger is far away. But that is not the case. Under President Bazoum, Niger was an important strategic partner for us in the fight against Islamist terrorism, but also in border management. This matters because Niger is a key transit country for migration and has a rapidly growing population. The ongoing destabilization of the country threatens us with even more mass migration and expansion of Islamist terrorism. This is neither in our interest nor in the interest of Niger. We therefore call for the immediate release of President Mohamed Bazoum, and we must find ways to cooperate with Niger in the fight against terrorism and in migration management. Thank you.
Merci, Reinhold Lopatka.
Thank you very much, Reinhold Lopatka.
Dear colleagues, nearly 3 years after the military coup in Niger, the democratically elected President Bazoum and his wife remain detained by the military junta. They have been without proper access to lawyers or communication to the outside world. I had the chance to work with President Bazoum when I chaired the high-level advisory group on countering terrorism and violent extremism of IPU, of the International Parliamentarian Union, and he was a strong partner. As a result, now the situation in Niger is deteriorating. President Bazoum was an important partner in our work against terrorism, against organized crime, and also against this irregular migration in the Sahel. Therefore, we must send a clear message today. President Bazoum and his wife must be released immediately, and Niger must return to constitutional order and credible democratic elections. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Hans Heider.
Danke, Herr Vorsitzender.
Thank you, President. Commissioner. We call for the immediate and unconditional release of the democratically elected President Mohamed Bazoum and his wife. 2 years after the coup in Niger, they're still being arbitrarily detained, and the death penalty is being threatened. They've dissolved political parties, the constitutional order, media pluralism is being curtailed, and they're turning away from the ICC too. They're withdrawing there. But that doesn't mean that any war crimes can be committed with impunity. Now, no one will claim that the situation in Niger is a surprise. We warned about a coup when we had parliamentary assemblies with African countries and the ACP countries. Now we need to step up our commitment so that humanitarian aid gets to the people who need it and so that fundamental rights can be restored.
Thank
you very much. Sebastian Tinkinen for Catch the Eye.
Dear President, every month this House calls for immediate release of imprisoned African opposition figures and condemns atrocities on the continent. Don't get me wrong, it is good that we condemn them. But the question we should ask is, why do so many of our calls have no influence? The answer is that Europe has been losing its significance. How do we turn this around? We must become militarily formidable. We must return to being innovators instead of regulators. And we must stop boosting our rivals while they are trying to gain a foothold in developing countries. We should neither push our factories to China nor keep buying Russian energy. The world runs on power and leverage. If we have neither, we become irrelevant. Let's make Europe matter again. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, cher.
Thank you very much indeed, colleague. To bring this discussion to a close, we will now hear from Commissioner Hoekstra on behalf of the Commission.
That is fine. Thank you very much, President, and many thanks to the honourable members for their contributions. I will again be speaking on behalf of Kaja Kallas. Since the military coup of July 2023, human rights in Niger have, of course, deteriorated significantly. The military junta continues to repress political opponents. Many of you have referred to that, dissidents, journalists, including indeed former President Mohamed Bazoum, as well as former officials, human rights activists and journalists who remain detained on clearly politically motivated charges. After the coup, and this is common knowledge in this House, I'm sure, EU-Niger relations reached a historic low, characterized by deep mistrust, reduced diplomatic engagement, hostile rhetoric and unfounded accusations, clearly not by us. EU's aid was largely suspended and regrettably, the EU's image in the country was damaged. The situation requires a clear-eyed and pragmatic approach to our engagement with European interests, as is always the case in diplomacy at its core. President, honourable members, to do so more effectively, a renewed approach for the Sahel was endorsed by the Foreign Affairs Council in November of 2025. And it is in line with this approach that the EU Special Representative for the Sahel has visited the 3 countries of the Central Sahel, including Niger. He met with high-level government officials, such as the Prime Minister and other key stakeholders. And it was this visit that demonstrated Niger's willingness to improve its relations with the EU based on sovereignty, mutual respect and shared interest. It also revealed that points of disagreement can and should be addressed frankly and directly. And of course, the situation of former President Bazoum and the restrictions faced by independent media and civil society actors were openly discussed during the visit. Now, although the visit did not produce immediate significant progress, it represented a step forward in improving the relationship. President, honourable members, I've clearly heard your concerns regarding the situation in Niger, and we share them in full. The repression of critical and dissenting voices has gone on, and it has gone on far too long. The EU will continue to raise its concerns about systematic human rights violations in the country, as we are currently doing at the ongoing session of the UN Human Rights Council. Nevertheless, and that is always the complicated but needed equation in diplomacy, we must remain engaged in the Central Sahel, because disengagement, in our view, is not an option, and it doesn't serve the interests of the European Union. Thank you.
They admitted he was their partner in the border management and the fight against jihadist terrorism. In other words, he was the gatekeeper that keep Africans out of Europe. Let's go into the history the EU wants to forget. Niger provides about 15 to 70% of uranium that powers France's nuclear reactors. For decades, Niger has kept the lights on in Paris while its own people lived in darkness. Mohamed Bazoum presented the continuation of this Francophilic system. When the military ousted him, they didn't just arrest a president, they severed a colonial umbilical cord. That is why the EU is terrified that his mandate officially ends on April 2nd, 2026. The EU speakers say, and I quote, "cannot remain silent." But where was their silence when other allies suppressed their own people? They only cry when the democratically elected leader is someone who signs the contracts they like. They accuse the military of, quote, "kidnapping children and arming jihadis," end of quote. But they ignore the fact that the people of Niamey are in the streets supporting the military and demanding that France and US bases get out. But why are they so quiet about what is happening in Togo, what is happening in Cameroon? They are equally coups. The agency for Bazoum is really an agency for Western relevance. One speaker admitted that, quote, "Europe has been losing its significance." They are losing the Sahel to a new spirit of sovereignty. The dog that is tied to a gold chain is still a dog that is tired. Bazoum was the worst tied dog. Niger has decided it no longer wants a chain. No matter how the West calls it democracy. We see the game. We know the history. Now we see through all that they do. We have people who have been in power changing constitutions when we know that democracy says we must obey our constitutions. But these ones, just simply because they still say yes sir, they are still in office and they are rather going after leaders that their people are so much in love with. What an amazing people that we have. But anyway, they said he has even decided to move out of the International Criminal Court, whatever. Like one time he said, whatever that they decide, we are not in their jurisdiction. So for that matter, it doesn't apply to us. And all these things, they are not happy. But one thing that we need to let people understand is we are Africans. We have every right to decide for ourselves. And we don't want people trying to tell us who should lead us and who should be what and what we should be doing at what point in time and what is right for us. Even when we, the people, have decided that this is what we want. We are the ones that are with these leaders and we love them. And people must respect the African decision. United we stand, divided we fall, and united we keep standing forever and ever. The greatest enemy of the African is mental slavery. So let's decolonize ourselves from mental slavery. Let's keep sharing to educate our brothers and sisters. Together we'll make Africa great for ourselves and the next generations that are going to come. So that's the latest around the world. And in Europe.